Good morning. A number of people have asked me to comment about these drones that were seen around US Air Force bases in England, in Britain, specifically Lakenheath, Mildenhall and others. I think I know what might have actually happened. Hey, peace, love and understanding, folks, even to people who don't like me, and that's great. Keep it up. Lessons from history. The drone spotted recently on the outskirts of NATO US Air Force bases. That same type of operation has happened before. We need to learn from history. I lived during the Cold War, and there was an operation equivalent to the drone incursions that was a potential threat to US nuclear submarines in Holyloch in Scotland. So in Britain in the 1980s, which was a long time ago, you little whippersnappers, there was people in Britain just as disenfranchised, disconnected from government, unrepresented, and feeling generally peed off about what was happening in Britain as there are today. And those people did the equivalent of the drone attacks. So growing up in Dumbarton and going to school in Helensburgh on the Clyde, I know a lot about nuclear submarines. Obviously, the British government has Faz Lane, which is the Polaris and Trident submarine base. But the Americans, for years, they're not there now, used to have this Holyloch, which was the base of American nuclear-powered submarines, but with SSBMs, ICBMs in submarines. And the American operation in Holyloch was often compromised by sympathizers of the Soviet Union who lived in Britain. First of all, let me explain about Holyloch. So Holyloch was an American base where American nuclear submarines could tie up to a ship, not on shore, but they had a support ship, and submarines would come from their Atlantic duty up the Clyde and dock next to this ship where nuclear stuff and Hershey bars could be changed and crew could be exchanged for another mission. And submarines would come in, dock, and others would go out. And there was a schedule kept up that could be seen from the shoreline. And that's the wee point. So back in the 1980s, there was a lot of very peed off people who didn't like the United States, who didn't like nuclear war, who didn't actually like capitalism. And they would often be seen selling the newspaper Marxism Today down at the marketplace. These were British peed-off, disenfranchised voters who had this utopian, misguided view of what communism was. Now, communism as an idea is good, but communism in Russia, communism in the Soviet Union was truly evil. You can't say Stalin was nice. The idea of communism compared with capitalism is a political agenda, and some people in the 1980s thought that it was a better way to go. So they were misguidedly prepared to hand over national secrets to the Soviet Union via the Marxism Today newspaper and other sites. So, Mrs. Marxist, who lived in a wee bungalow on the shore of Holyloch with her binoculars, would send a wee postcard to Marxism Today in London saying, "I saw an American nuclear submarine arrive at 10:07 a.m. and another one, U-57, departed at 13:12. Now, that information was sent to London by her, and she thought she was doing her bit against capitalism. You know, she was actually working for the Ruskies. She was working for the KGB. But she thought she was playing her part in CND and making Britain a utopian communist socialist state. She was actually being abused. And the KGB and Russian communists wet themselves laughing. They thought that Brits who empathized with communism were effing idiots, and they were. Communism was never a utopian CND anti-capitalist dream. It was a effing nightmare. But the communists understood this disenfranchised people in the 1980s who foolishly sympathized with the idea of communism and were prepared to hand over NATO and British and American secrets. It's well known that the KGB actually financed the type of newspapers that Marxism Today and others represented. But they were actually even more direct. They would go down the pub. The KGB would send a sympathizing agent down to the pub on Holyloch and speak to people and said, if I sent you £1,000 every month, if I ever phoned you up, and I might not, and I'll still send you the £1,000, could you have a wee look out your window and see if you can see a nuclear submarine? Yeah, sure, mate. How much do I get? I'll give you £1,000 directly to your bank account, and I might never phone you, but I might just ask a wee favour sometime in the future. That's how it happened. And I know that is true because I've got a good friend here in France who worked for the Dutch Secret Service. He was based in Rotterdam, and one of their nightmares is that they had socialist communist sympathisers who would pass on ship movements from Rotterdam harbour to the communists. And they knew who they were, just as British MI5 would know who the sympathisers were in Holyloch. So they were kept a good track of. But these people were the disenfranchised, foolish idiots who were helping at the time the Soviet Union. And I think with these drone incursions, the same thing is happening today. Disenfranchised, paid for effing idiots are being influenced by Putin this time to actually do something for cash, or thinking that they're actually helping against the evil Starmer empire and supporting the Putin-loving Trump regime, being hired either by political misinformation or cash to drive their Ford Transit van to Lakenheath in Norfolk and actually fly their hobby DJI drone very near the barrier fence of Lakenheath and Mildenhall. They weren't actually breaking the law, but what they did, and it was very successful, is send a willy up the Americans that drones, hobby drones, could be around their base. And of course, the Americans totally overreacted. How on earth would an F-16 ever counter a DJI hobby drone? An F-16's minimum airspeed is about 90 knots. No, a drone can fly at 5 miles an hour, 2 feet off the ground. There's no way you can counter it. I think what we need around these bases is anti-drone technology, things like EMP pulse devices that can knock out their electronics or lasers that can burn them. I think that's absolutely vital. But in my humble opinion, and I'm often wrong, but it's just my humble opinion, looking at a precedent from history, that the disenfranchised people who sympathize wrongly with the Soviet Union or wrongly with Vladimir Putin have been put over to do a mission to put the willy up the Americans and the British government. It wasn't aliens, folks. It was idiots. In my humble opinion, the truth is out there.